Okay, everybody, let's talk a little bit about socialism. And, socialism is one of those things that kind of has a negative, kind of a pejorative term attached to it. That's, thrown around as an insult. But we do have socialist parties all throughout Europe, all throughout Latin America. And then we also have fascist groups, which, have kind of reared the ugly head in the past few months. And also, we think of 1930s Germany and extremist groups, and whether it's here in the United States, in Iraq, in places in the Middle East, in some Latin American countries, there are going to be fascist groups as well. Kind of that strong sense of nationalism. A very, very one language, one culture type of feeling. When we talk about socialism and the variants of socialism, Karl Marx is probably one of the foremost known people when talking about communism, right? He always criticized free market economy, especially, criticizing capitalism because it creates inequity. And you have a gap between the rich and the poor that exists in a capitalist system. Now, some of Marx's criticisms about capitalism were that capitalism kind of increased wealth for business owners and also deepened poverty for the workers more. So the business owners would make money off the backs of the workers and not necessarily share with them. Now, I mean, it'd be interesting if we were in class to see maybe if you guys know of any businesses that might do profit sharing. I know Tesla, as opposed to sharing profits or bonuses, Elon Musk tends to give away stock options as bonuses, and as we see, the stock is valued about $700 right now. So that's a pretty good. That's actually a pretty good perk for a job, is to get that much stock options in it. Say for instance you get 20 stock options at $700 a piece. What is that? $14,000. Then Tesla increases in value by $300. I'm just throwing a number out there to 1,000. Now your stock is gonna be worth exponentially more, right? That might be an example, but for the most part, we see and we hear the horror stories about big employers, how they treat some of their employees. But that's just part of the capitalist mindset that we have, is we want to get rich as quick as possible and use our talents to kind of exploit that. And like I said, there's really nothing wrong with that. But if you're a business owner, I think the best part is to not exploit your workers and maybe treat them well, and give them benefits and bonuses, because I think that could help grow a company. I'm no business major or business expert. I just think when employees are happy and they see maybe the ability to promote or make more money, they're going to work harder. So it's kind of a slippery slope that we talk about at times with Marx's criticism of capitalism. But remember, his main criticism was that capitalists make money off the backs of the workers without totally sharing. Let's go to the next one. In order also to avoid the exploitation of workers, the government should be involved and kind of curb down that exploitation, which is a very interesting type of thought, where we would have more government involved in our economy, in our business sector, which is something we talked about in the last class. Let's go. Our fate in life will depend on being born into a rich or poor family. This is another criticism of capitalism. And we kind of are born into that cycle of poverty that we hear people talk about. Religion, culture, these are all distractions from the fundamental class conflict, that difference between the rich and the poor. All right. A variant of socialism is communism. Remember, communism and socialism aren't necessarily the same thing. Socialism is more of an economic theory, while communism is more of a political ideology, or a political type background, a political type government. Communism, kind of was spurred out of the 1917 Russian Revolution. Abolish capitalism. Some of the advocates preferred for small communes, or a small community where the government would be dictatorial and the author here classifies it better as state socialism, where we have a commune of people kind of working toward the common good of that society. Now, we talk about social democracy. You could have social democracies, through pretty much reform, not revolution. And they thought this would be enough. Kind of work with liberal democracy and liberalism. Remember, when we talk about liberal democracy and liberalism, there's going to be that offshoot where we believe that, or that issue where we believe that as part of being a liberal democratic society, you need free and fair elections, and that's a really important concept of that. Advocate for the nationalization of industries, unions, and welfare state programs. So bringing the government into our type of lives right now. So say, for instance, if we went to a more socialist society here in the United States, it would be like making healthcare a national industry, or maybe making energy pricing a national industry, or the airlines national industry. People that work for the government runs it. They would also be in control of labor unions and welfare programs for the state. Things like we do have aspects of socialism here in the United States, and we can't ignore that, and we can't try to act like we don't. And things like Social Security, that's a form of socialism. That's redistribution of the wealth in a sense. You pay into a program, then you get money back, where people's tax dollars are taken out. Things like Medicare is also socialized medicine. Sometimes people forget that, right? One of the things that's kind of concerning when we talk about state socialism within a social democracy is that, a lot of people don't like the concept of nationalization. Like I said, when we talk about nationalization, we tend to focus on 1930s Germany, right? We hear that fascist type organizations where, the one culture, one language. I don't think, socialism is that far of political ideology that happens. So a lot of these societies will drop that goal. Socialists in Europe have been more moved toward modern liberalism than American liberals have moved toward socialism. And, we kind of use that word socialism here in the United States as a pejorative term, right? When we can't really ignore the fact that, like I said, we have a lot of socialist programs out there already, and a lot of them are developed by the New Deal, by LBJ's Great Society. So we have aspects where the government does intervene in our lives to maybe try to cut down inequality or try to reduce barriers to success. Okay, fascism. Mussolini rejected liberalism, capitalism, and socialism. Mussolini, the leader of Italy during World War II. Hitler thought all kinds of people were enemies, whether it was Jewish people, gay people, communists, socialists, liberals, right? Very focused nationalistic point of view. Again, one culture, one language, and kind of sacrificing yourself for the good of the country. It'd be interesting to see that, there's a level of brainwashing that goes along with this, as well as Hitler was able to establish that cult of personality and had people do horrible things, unspeakable acts in the name of promoting his ideology, right? So that's one of the weird things that I think we tend to have people that slip into that cult of personality. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into chapter 6 to start talking about collective action and what causes a person to want to be motivated to get involved. Whether it's, somebody, grandma and grandpa that go down and want to volunteer at the polls, to all the way to the other extreme where we have a lunatic that wants to wipe out a ethnic group, right? So just kind of that thing. Kind of going along with the lines of this, principle 1 of fascism is nationalism and national purity. The master race, so to speak, arose in Europe in the 1900s. Liberalism and socialism were prominent. Government intervention was prominent. These ideologies treated people equally as individuals or workers, but it left the people without an identity. And we started to see new levels of nationalism come through this. you know, uh, the celebration of a shared culture and a shared identity, um, excluding non members, basing problems on outsiders such as members of the Jewish faith or immigrants. And the core guiding principle would be service to your homeland, service to your country, service to your leader, right? Kind of scary when we get into that type of thought. Not the Nazis obviously incorporated an intense racism. The master race within the Third Reich killed 6 million people in the Holocaust, and there's thoughts that up to maybe 30 million might have been killed. So there's a bunch of different statistics out there, but like I said, it was enough to, in a sense, spark a movement that demonized a ethnic group, and their whole defense in Nuremberg was what? I was just following orders. So there's a point where you can kind of get into that mindset where, do I really need to follow orders, or is this something that's morally questionable? Do I have the ability to do that? And in these fascist societies, you don't. I also find meaning in power and authority. The rejection of that classic liberalist vision, where we have, kind of the fact that individuals really won't accomplish much on their own, and democracy will create weak and divided leadership. Basically, what we're trying to say here is that we're not going to have individual liberty, because we're going to be at the call and beckoning of the leader, whether the dictator or monarch or whatever we have, emperor and so on. And you could see it. Mussolini's whole slogan was believe, obey, and fight. Right? And if you get enough people stirred up, Hitler said that the bigger the lie, the more people believe it. Right? There's kind of a defense also in directing all resources to military power and state prestige, parades, propaganda. A lot what we see in, some of the socialist countries or the nationalistic countries now, like North Korea, Cuba. Fascists also imagined that they were defending villagers' wholesome, homogeneous way of life, fighting for the little guy. They hated socialists, intellectuals, and all forms of diversity. Now, when we kind of look at this point here, and we look at what does it mean by hating intellectuals? Why do intellectuals need to be silenced? Or why do we want to dumb down people? Or why do we want to restrict the internet? It's simple. If you restrict information to a group of people, they're not going to learn things. And I think once you get into your studies, and the more and more you read, and the more you understand about things, there's a higher probability that you're going to open up your mind and maybe focus on alternative explanations for issues instead of just going with what the government tells you. And that's what I want you guys to kind of get out of this class too, is try to make your own mindset. I mean, the book says how to think for yourself about politics. I think that's a little bit patronizing. I know you guys are able to do that, but maybe expand your mind and look a little bit more critically and try to address alternative explanations for things, or different types of phenomena that might come in, and try to explain that. Fascism was delegitimized. They were defeated in World War II and in the Holocaust. Defeated in World War II and the Holocaust. Nazis became the most recognizable symbol of evil. And still, we get. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and you heard what Gina Carano said about, kind of feeling like the Nazis were coming after her, and it's just a really dumb comment she made. Now, freedom of speech and so on, what we talked about that in American politics, but when you kind of try to make analogies like that, it's really a really dumb thing to do. Where I would never compare, me being silenced to what happened to people in 1940s Europe as far as the Holocaust and stuff. There are some far right parties today in Europe, strongly radicalized national identity and the exclusion of immigrants. We're going to actually get into talking about Brexit and some of the things that went into Brexit, and there was part of, some of it involved a nationalistic point of view from the people in the UK that, weren't too crazy about some immigrants that were coming into the area as freely as they were. When we get to talking about states, we'll talk a little bit more about the European Union, and this will make sense. So here's just alternative sides of liberal tradition. We have, the traditional political spectrum here, right? We have, liberalism on the left, in its kind of the forms that we have. Then we have classic liberalism. Then we that could be akin to maybe a little bit of libertarianism, more so than the Burkean conservatives. Then you have the religious right, and then fascism at the very extreme. So this is a good kind of a tree of where, a lot of our thought is flowed from, our thought is grown from. And the branches will branch off to different parts of the ideologies that we have here in the world. So ideologies are always changing. People can change. People can look at things differently. We had a talk about it when we were together as a class. You're younger. You all are younger. You may be looking at things a little bit more liberally. But once you buy a house, once you pay taxes, once you get a job, you might start looking at things a little different. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to you guys, but it's a possibility, right? But in kind of that, we talk about the influences on our political thought. A lot of it is also comes and is predicated on what we study. So if you go and study a social science in college, it may have you continue to have a more liberal thought if you do. So we also have seen, instances where we have religious revivals here in the United States. I think we had the start of the moral majority in the 70s and the 80s, and they still have an influence today on our political thought. And they're a very real portion of the religious right, or the Republican Party that we have here in the United States. Environmentalism is something that I know a lot of you are probably going to be interested in. It emerged as a movement in the 60s and 70s. Europe has parties like the Green Party or ecologists. We have a Green Party here in the United States, and they're probably the fourth biggest party within our electorate. You have the Democrats and Republicans 1 and 2. There's really no, it's probably 1 and 1A, or they could be interchangeable in those numbers. Number 3 would probably be the Libertarian Party, and then number 4 would probably be the Green Party, and focus on and making an ecological difference here in the United States. A lot of this has to do with rejecting others' ideologies about economic and human-centric concepts of the good of life. Humans are part of nature, and our future depends on the health in the environment. So what good is having a country and having an earth where, maybe 30, 40 years from now, the climate might skyrocket 20 or 30 degrees either way, right? Natural beauty and sustainability are fundamental values. I think these are really important. I think the preservation of natural resources is important. The preservation of national parks and state parks is important. Gets people out there, gets people to be able to maybe in some senses control their mental health a bit better. I do know if I ever have, some time where I have anxiety or I have some type of thing that's bothering me, I'll go out and sit on the rocks in Coronado Beach and kind of clear my mind and try to do that. But without, some of those things that we have here, it might not be feasible if our Earth is gone. We also need to be precautionary with this, right? Humans need to moderate to avoid overwhelming the planet, and we've seen this, and a lot of you that are taking apes now know that, right? Or, like I said in the other classes, you guys know a lot more about this than I do. So we have concerns about population growth and climate change. The author uses the word global warming. We're not going to use the word global warming. We're going to use the word climate change because, like, I spoke with you guys, and it could go both ways, right? If we wait to see if our worst scenarios come true, it may be too late to respond or maybe fix things to get them back to the way they were. Environmentalists in relation to other ideologies, critics of liberals, conservatives, and socialists for ignoring environmental issues. They almost always kind of align with the political left, so we're kind of, we hear about that. We hear about stuff like the Green New Deal here in the U.S. We hear about, being too dependent on fossil fuels. We hear about the fact that, what happened in Texas, was never expected that type of weather to ever hit there. But if you look at climate change and maybe if it can work going up, if it can work by raising temperatures, I know a lot of you have told me it could also work in the inverse. So what's up? Islamism. And this is a political ideology where a lot of people are in this ideology are motivated off the beliefs of the Quran, and they live their lives off the teachings of the Quran, and the Quran is kind of the guiding, in a sense, a constitution or legal document that motivates the way members of Islam will act. So we need to replace secular law with Sharia law, right? So Sharia law is law based off of the teachings of the Quran. So a strict interpretation of principles and codes in the Quran as a way to defend against corrupt Western influence. So most of it is going to be religious justice, right? Restricting interaction between the sexes. We see that in Afghanistan, right? Strict female dress code. We see that. Barring blasphemy, right? And liberal rights and that electoral democracy is kind of seen as illegitimate imports from the Western world. So, I think it's very hard to implement a value system on a society that isn't used to democracy. I always like to use the example, it would be like us going to a dictatorship right away. We don't really know what could occur out of that. We're a little bit more well-read, we have a little bit more information, but imagine telling somebody that has lived under Sharia law their whole life that now you're going to have democratically elected leaders, you're going to have a constitution, and your religious views are going to be taken out of kind of the government, and you're supposed to abide by a governing document as opposed to a religious document now. It might seem a little bit out there for people that don't totally understand it. So when I say kind of look at it that way, that's what I mean. Imagine us going to a society that is where we have to, in a sense, follow the Bible to its words. And that's a very hard thing to do because A, we don't all believe in the same thing. B, the Bible was translated from Aramaic, and whether there's something lost in translation, basically stuff like that. We'll have an ummah, which is a community of Muslims, rejection of concepts of state, since authority will come from Islam. One government, one people, and banning or banishing Western influence from Muslim lands. And part of Bin Laden's goal in 9/11 was to try to reduce American influence and try to prevent Western values from reaching the Middle East, which is really, really kind of hypocritical when you think about it, because if in the 9/11 report it was determined that a lot of these hijackers were visiting adult clubs in different cities, which was kind of contrary to what their dogmatic principles were with regards to Western influences. So there are always the hypocrisy in any type of of things that we go into. Jihad, which means struggle. This word is open to interpretation. Classic Islamic test prohibits the killing of women, children, suicide, and also the innocent. However, martyrdom is strongly praised in the Quran, and sometimes terrorists will use this these passages to justify their actions. When we talk about relationship to other ideologies, this ideology is profoundly different from the dominant ideologies of liberal democracies. Not all Muslims are political Islamists, and not all political Islamists endorse violence. It's true. It's only a small segment that we see. And again, if we look at this, here is political Islam added to our tree spectrum, so to speak. Okay, guys, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up here. When we talk about ideologies, in conclusion, it's opportunities for us to participate in parties, be a part of a campaign, participate in rallies, maybe be in a protest. Relevance of fascism and political Islam despite lack of legitimacy in the West, so we have that. And new alternatives are always possible. We do have a very much of a mixed economy here in the United States, where we'll talk about this later when we get into economies in more detail, but we have what's called a mixed economy, where we don't have a pure market economy, we don't have a pure command economy, but we have somewhere in between where we have, a capitalist economy with government intervention on it. Okay, guys, hope you like this. We'll see you next time.